So in this video I'm going to be teaching you how to TAS Skyward Sword, and I figured I'd post this after the no-bit TAS. I have a lot more experience now and can do some things a lot easier. So to start off, you're going to want to go to your controller settings, and in Wiimote 1, you're going to want to add an emulated Wiimote. Make sure Attach Motion Plus is on and that you have the nunchuck extension. And once you have that, your layout might look a little different, but you should have this TAS input window. And you can drag these sliders, and you can notice that you can start doing things. So they're a bit complicated, but once you understand them, they're pretty easy to follow. Now this video won't go in depth on how to TAS games. There are plenty tutorials online that are better than this one, but this is specifically if you're looking to TAS Skyward Sword. So to start off, the most important thing is running and movement. So in a TAS, you might be wondering, how do I roll? Well, the short answer is hotkey. As you can see, when I press this hotkey, this slider moves, but if I just try to move it myself, it doesn't seem to work. So to make Dolphin actually read the input as a roll, you have to bind a hotkey. So in the extension motion simulation, you're going to want to bind the shake on the y-axis to a hotkey of your choice and make sure these settings are applied. And when you press it, you'll see a little oscillating wave there. And now if you hold that hotkey, you will roll, or do a shield bash, or a spin attack. So to roll optimally in this game, I'm just going to show you with the data viewer. You're going to want to hold the hotkey for 2 frames, and you see you'll get 40 speed, which is a roll. And then to roll frame perfectly afterwards, you're going to want to see your potential speed reach 33, and then again, hold the hotkey for 2 frames, and you'll get a frame perfect roll. So great. Now for brake sliding. For brake sliding, the optimal way to do it is wait until your speed hits 33, let go of sprint for a frame, press C, and then hold this stick position, which is called ESS. And this will set your speed to negative and let you brake slide. And you can also do it in any direction you want. For sword movement, you can actually use these sliders, and you can see Link will start slashing his sword up or down, or to the side. So basically, this is the vertical slider. This will slash your sword up or down. And this is the horizontal slider, so it'll go to the left or to the right. And this slider is your sword tilt. So as you can see, my sword is tilting with this slider. But as you can see, there is kind of a dead zone. So if I go about right here, I'll start slashing. But what if I want to, do this? Well, again, you have to use a hotkey. So the way I binded these, I binded them to arrow keys on my keyboard, and I used these settings. The reason why is because if I turn the speed faster, I'll just get a slash. So I fine-tune this, so if I hold down the hotkey, I won't get a slash. And if you heard me mentioning in the live reveal, the sword twirling in Skyview Temple took me 6 hours per, because I had to use hotkeys frame by frame, like this. I couldn't just drag these sliders how I want because the sword doesn't go far enough. So that was pretty annoying. But with time it gets better. So for slashing, you're going to see if you hold this slider at the max, you start slashing. But if I frame advance and hold it to the max, it doesn't work. That's because there's actually a dead zone for the slider, which starts around 69,000 on this side and around 5,000 or so on this side. So if you want to do good slashes, you're going to want to hold the slider either between 68,000 and 6,000. Hold it for 4 frames, and then drag it to the very either left or right, and this will just make you slash forever. The reason why you have to hold it outside the dead zone is because if I just held it here, you're going to see that I stop slashing. And this is because for some reason if you hold it right here and not in the dead zone, the game will just like correct your sword back into the center. So if you see I adjust this back in the center, I'll start slashing, which is a little strange. So the perfect way to do it is hold it for 3 frames or 4 frames, and then just hold it in the dead zone. And you can see I'm just going to slash forever, which is pretty nice. And for vertical slashes, you might be wondering, why does it only slash once? For some reason you have to hold the horizontal slider slightly out of the dead zone. So I can just like increase it by 10 units, and now it will start, and maybe a little more. Now it will start doing fast vertical slashes. So again, you're going to want to hold it for about 1, 2, 3. And again, this slider, now I'll get perfect slashes. Again, you don't have to do this technique to get perfect slashes. Instead, you could just hold this for 3 frames and then time your slashes instead. But this is just a shortcut of doing it. But if you want really specific slashes, like you'll see, I'll kind of go in different directions each time, but if I want all downward slashes, I'm going to have to do them all manually, because the game will just be reading the Wiimote as if you're flicking it up and down, so sometimes it won't match up. So now for harp playing. Originally, the way I did it, I had to bind the harp to a controller, and I had to write a script in here to simulate the playing, but I figured out that with the correct settings, because you're going to see, if I just use these settings, it doesn't really play all the way. So I had to bind the same ones, but I had to increase the speed and set the angle to 120. If I set the angle to, let's say 100. Works pretty well. But then if I set it to, 90, it doesn't go all the way. So you're going to want to set it between 180 and 100. So I do 120, which is pretty good. And it works 100% of the time. So now you may be wondering, well, I have all these sword attacks, but how do I do a stab? Stabs are actually pretty simple. You're going to want to hold the Wiimote accelerometer slider to all the way to the left or right, then the opposite, and then back to the original. And that will give you a stab. And that methodology also works on vines. When you're climbing vines, you might be wondering, why can't I dash up? Well, to dash up, you just have to hold the slider once to the left or right, and you'll get a dash, like that. So now onto flying. Flying is pretty easy once you get the hang of it, but as you can see, the way to turn is using this tilt slider. So if you want to turn the max, again, you want to hold it just outside the dead zone, frame advance about 4 times, and then you want to hold it outside the dead zone. And this will just make sure you never drift back into the center. Because if you just held it here, you would see that eventually I would go back into the center, which is annoying. And the same thing applies for up and down. For flaps, you're just going to want to hold a vertical direction for 2 frames, and you should get a flap. If I want to go slightly down because I want to get to a light pillar or I want to have an angle or something, you'll be drifting, but you can always just do the trick where you advance 4 frames and then hold it outside the dead zone, and you won't drift. Now for items, you can actually use the IR. As you can see, it can move around like this. But that is only because we have enable controller input on. If we don't, it won't work. So we have to make sure that enable controller input is on in order to use IR for aiming. But that is kind of slow. As you can see, it can't really aim everywhere. So the best way to do it is actually use the gyroscope sliders again. And as you can see, they can aim really fast. But you don't want to aim too fast, because if you aim too fast, you'll start a slash, like that. So again, the dead zone is about 49,000 before you start a slash. If I go any more, it'll do a slash. So about 50. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reason it's doing this is because imagine you're flicking the Wiimote back and forth at this interval. I'm not entirely sure if that's the reason, but if you just want it to move exactly up the screen, you're just going to want to hold it for like 4 frames, and then it'll just keep aiming off the screen like that. So that's pretty good. So aiming is actually pretty simple because you can just kind of trial and error it. You know, if you want to hit something, especially with the slingshot, you can just hold the pellet, and then depending on where you want to go, you can just change these sliders so it eventually hits something. Like that. And so that's really all I can think of in this video to share. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to help. Hope this helped.